Um, but what I let me just press got it so I get that out of my way. Then what ended up happening was I was stung, if I could use that word, about the importance and value of the human-animal bond, and how valuable therapeutically animal-assisted interventions could be to a clinician. So from 1973 to 87, that was before 87 was when I became a licensed psychologist beyond just being a faculty member at a university. I had done research on, of course, incorporating and working alongside animals in therapeutic environments. So when I began my own clinical work, of course, it was very logical for me because I don't see me being separate from all of the types of therapies that I integrate. And so animals have been a very important part of my life, especially being a boy growing up without animals. My life was changed once I witnessed, that the power that Sasha provided in that early time with the youngsters. And ironically, and then I'll stop. Ironically, I didn't start with what one would consider traditional therapy animals. I had many pocket animals early in my clinical work, rabbits and guinea pigs, so smaller animals. And then I was fascinated with birds, and I got training from a national expert on avians that really helped me, one, learn about the behaviors that I needed to understand and help me select certain birds that I could work alongside. So I began incorporating and working alongside cockatoos, very large birds, and they were in the practice with me, and then had conures and lovebirds. And then as years went on, of course, in about 88, I started working alongside some of my therapy dogs. And so ever since then, it has been a true, if I use the word menagerie of various animals. And I always use the line, that Irv Robbins wrote years ago, who was the founder of Baskin and Robbins, when he said that not all my flavors are popular to all of my clients, but I know I have a flavor that every person that comes will enjoy. And with so many different animals, and as I said early in my career, there were times, that I could have worked alongside 10 different therapy animals. They all didn't come at once, otherwise it really would be a challenge. But we always had birds and a couple of dogs, and of course I had a bearded dragon, and so it was really quite fun. And I have to just give you a giggle. I'm probably the only, not the only, but I'm sure there's many others that go through this, that one of my rabbits that used to be in my office, sometimes she would just wander in the back when she was relaxing. So sometimes my handouts had little rabbit bites because she would go to the place and chew on some of the papers. So I used to giggle that was the case. So that sort of gives you a beginning, you know what I mean? Being mentored was complicated because, and that I think is another question, but when I began my career, this was really an unheard conversation, you know what I mean? We could talk about people sort of trying to figure out in the community, who was this guy that would be walking dogs or birds? But on the other hand, where I found that I needed support, and it's something that as professionals, all of us should agree to, is I had to learn a lot more about behaviors of various animals and how to protect their welfare, because I've been involved in respecting animal welfare way before this was what I would call a buzz conversation. I've always felt that one needed to protect the integrity of the animals that you work alongside with. So I have been fortunate over all of my years, and I still go to workshops to learn new things or things that I need to better understand about animal behavior and better ways of training. And so in the early years, I spent a lot of time with professionals that knew, for example, birds or guinea pigs or rabbits, and of course, later on, of course, with dogs, to assure best practice in training and to assure all the things that today you talk about, breaks. But to me, this was all intuitive. I have to say that I'm a professional magician, so I'm going to go backwards and then I'll stop. And when I began working with children, my quick realization was, man, the kids love the magic tricks. When I do it, makes them really comfortable and engages them. But I have to say that very quickly, going back to 73 and onward, I really appreciated the fact that these beings aren't magic tricks. They're not gimmicks. They're none of those things. And so you have to be sure that you're protecting their integrity. So I don't know if there's a strong question that comes up today, but the integrity of a therapy animal isn't only because now the field is saying you need to do this. You have to believe it, you have to live it, and you have to walk it. And my animals have taught me that. So over all of the years, and I don't want to be anthropomorphic, but they look in my eyes and they sort of let me know very quickly when they're comfortable and not comfortable. And I love when we talk about stressors and things like that. By the time you see animals looking really stressed, you've already missed the situation. So how do you set up a work environment that's safe? And I'll use the word respectful to every being. So when you look at the triangle, there is the client you serve, there's you as a clinician, and then there are your therapy animal or animals. To me, it's a team. And I've always worked in tandem. So again, another thing that I've written about and talked about, it sounds silly. I see myself being Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers with my animals. And it's not that we're great dancers because I'm a lousy dancer, although I try to practice. But I have learned to dance really well with my animals. And sometimes I let them lead because they know what they're doing. And sometimes I sort of take a little bit more leadership, of course, and guide the process, but really important to talk about the welfare part. So I'll be quiet because I know I carried on a little bit, which is something I do.
Well, that's what we're here for, though. We want to hear from you. So my next question then is about, how you inspire buy-in. We have a few questions about that. But one of the things that came up is a member said that they have a hard time explaining in a nutshell what AAI or our work with therapy animals is. And so when you're talking to someone who might not be in the field and who is a general vocational practitioner, how do you do that?
Again, being involved in the literature for so many years, I haven't, when people call me and don't know anything about me, but they go to my website, they already see all of these therapy animals in pictures. So they already know that maybe I'm a clinician that works alongside therapy animals. On my website, I actually talk a little bit about the human-animal bond and why it's relevant. Again, the conversation, to be honest with you, is a lot different today than it was in the early 70s. And of course, when I opened up my clinical practice in 87, very, very different place, because today, many people have heard of therapy animals. They may confuse therapy animals, and that's why I have to do a little bit more explaining than a service animal or an emotional support animal. But they witnessed on television the significance of the human-animal bond. So when people come in and they want to know specifically how the animal is working alongside me, we talk a bit about this, but I explained that my engagement with therapy animals is a form of complementary therapy. For some people that come to see me, they're really there to either get diagnosed as having either autism or ADHD. And so for some people, they're really coming from my specialty, which is the specific clients that I serve. When I'm doing therapy, they quickly get it. What was it like so many years ago when Puppy, who was my first therapy dog, was my office manager, if I could even use that term. She would walk out even before I was there and greet the new clients that were in the waiting room. I think they quickly recognized the first early principle of why people got involved in engaging in animal-assisted interventions, at least in clinical settings, was the animals could be a catalyst, a lubricant for comfort, could act as a fur blanket to get people more comfortable. But people have definitely seen over the years the many other ways that I work along therapy animals, ranging from kids that have OCD and are concerned about germs and learning because they want to interact with the animals, how they can pet an animal and recognize that we have, of course, even today more so with COVID, Purell and all the cleaning things, to children that never spoke before, that the parents have learned and the children have began to see how the animals help support the things that we work on. And I have to say, the touch wood, I've been fortunate. I'm going to be retiring from my clinical work actually a week from 10 days from now. September 1st will be the day that I kind of close my clinical office. That the reality is that I still have, because I work with children, right? I still have people come to see me. Like yesterday, I had a young man that just came by to say hello. He's 44. And I knew him when he was 12. So I still have people that sometimes come over or recognize, and the first question they ask is that animal that they knew still alive? So I haven't had a hard time getting buy-in, and I don't even try to disclose or not exclude, share that the animals are there, because in my case, if people have profound allergies or have profound fears of animals, unless they want to work on that fear, I'm not going to be the person that they want to come to, because the office, because they have animals and because the animals are there, and although it's kept really clean and tidy, if you have profound allergies, it's not going to work. So they understand, and because I have literature on the subject, books that I've written that are around the office, they have enough information. And in fact, on my website, in fact, there's even a couple of links. I don't put a lot of my links on my professional website on videos that we have produced on human-animal bond or animal-assisted interventions, but they've seen some of them. So I think I've answered your question. I think it's important for new people to perhaps, and I've helped early professionals that are engaging in the field develop like a handout that explains what is animal-assisted interventions, maybe going backwards a little bit more, talking about human-animal bond and why human-animal interactions are really helpful for all humans. So giving them a handout that briefly explains what animal-assisted interventions are, but you put it in user terms, you know what I mean, rather than having an academic flavor. Sometimes I try to explain it in real situations for the people so that they really understand what we're talking about. I may have, later on there may be a question, because parents, again, because I work with children, sign off that the child is allowed to work alongside a therapy animal or therapy animals. We talk about other things that we may do, like take a walk, and they sign off and they know where we're going and how this is all done. So I think informed background is really important. It can be done simply, again, having a handout right when you start with your intakes to explain that there'll be a therapy animal in there, explaining the value for people that aren't as comfortable in explaining it initially. But I strongly emphasize that today's place is much different. And so, as I said, I would say that in my work, probably 90%, and I'd even go higher, but I don't want to be wrong, already know why the animals are there. They understand the value. And then, of course, we go through a lot of safety precautions, but that may be another question, or the guidelines on how you interact with my therapy animals, because I don't want to use the word strict, but I'm very consistent about it being the pet partners word GABA in regards to being my animal's best advocate. I have believed that way before we've had that beautiful acronym, because again, I feel I'm their ambassador and I have to assure that everyone feels good about the process. So I'll be quiet.
Well, my next question is kind of related. And so, if you're getting started and you're looking for some resources to say, this is how I know this is a legitimate modality. We had the example in the question come up of someone who might be looking to work with a specific client population, for example, people with visual impairments. You mentioned your specific populations. Where do you suggest people go to find that rationale to put into their treatment planning?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I just glanced at all the questions. And the reason I just glanced at all the questions was I didn't want to really prepare. That's probably in respect for you. I wanted to be more casual and not give prepared answers. I'm going to answer the question backwards. One of my favorite quotes actually is by Steve Jobs, which is connecting the dots backwards. And I always have learned that Steve Jobs gave this talk years ago at Stanford. It was actually at the commencement, I think in 2005, 2006, and it was considered his best talk he ever gave, which was, what if these things didn't happen or did happen? How would my life have been different? Well, my life was very different because I grew up as a kid that didn't have animals, right? Then when I made the discovery that therapy animals, and of course there wasn't even a term then, could be valuable. When I started the field, the only book that was out was Boris Levinson's book, but I never read the book until many years later, because I was sort of involved right off the bat. So before I answer the major part of your question, I learned in my own clinical training, I've learned in my own life, and when I wanted to become a magician, is how do you think outside the box? And so no one really taught me about the value of animal-assisted interventions. I had to figure that one out, but I wanted to figure it out responsibly, safely, and then, of course, as years went on, of course, using best practices. So to answer your question, number one, I think you have to think on your own. You have to think about ways of why and how you can use animal-assisted interventions in a way that works with you. You know what I mean? My style of therapy, if I'm looking at the clinical side of my work, works really well in tandem with therapy animals. I don't fight the approaches. So that's a question I've always shared with treaters, is how do you do this where you're comfortable working alongside a therapy animal, where you're not feeling tied or rigid or uncomfortable in how the therapy animal is working alongside you. Today, and I think, when you brought that up, one of my students that was in my class, I'll say again to Dawn, I know that she works with persons with visual impairments. So I think that answering your question, today's literature is much richer than either many of you realize or recognize. So there are articles on best practice on how you develop a therapy animal intervention program that are generic. There have been many authors, such as even like one example would be Anne Howie, that give you a lot of good ideas of how to prepare yourself for all populations. If we want to become more specific, then you do research on, are there best practice concerns or methods for specific populations? Of course, rich today, or more rich today in the field of developmental disabilities such as autism. Lots have been written on best practice approaches. How do you think about incorporating animals? There has been more written today on folks that are elderly, both well elderly as well as persons that are either frail or have cognitive impairments. So I would seek out the literature to get an idea of best practices, but I think the initial best practice of figuring out how we, one, select a therapy animal to work with us, how do we assure that the environment is safe and rich with engagement, but the engagement is very different. So again, that is the good question. With a person with autism that has more profound autism, I incorporate or work alongside my animals much differently than maybe a child that has ADHD or other issues that we need to come across. So the other side, of course, is that today we have wonderful organizations. I love to do talks for lots of groups, but as probably many of you can only imagine, I have a very soft place in my heart for Pet Partners and now the new organization, because I believe in the mission. I think that Pet Partners is, I hope I don't sound like I'm showboating, but the gold standard. I think that the standards that are put together by the organization are tremendous, the resources that we have. So to answer the other parts of the questions, I've talked about knowing the literature, knowing yourself, but then there are other resources, there are other professional organizations. And I think today is one example of what AAIP is trying to do to get us more informed, to provide venues and resources and virtual communities so you can talk with each other. One of the hardest things for me in my early career was talking to other people. It's not like I didn't want to talk to people, but many people didn't even understand. I didn't even have a place to go. But I went to meetings maybe on dog training or dog ethology or animal behavior, and just listened to people talking about the animal part, so I got a better idea. Today we have communities where we can compare and talk about, how do you do this in your clinical practice? What suggestions would you give me? Again, it still has to be you, because I'm not uncomfortable. For example, one of the things that I did years ago, and it's one of my favorite things, is I would write letters to my patients, but they're therapy notes, where I would write my patients as the dog. But in reality, the notes, although they were cute and it came from the dog, the kids knew it was coming from me, but they were touched by the fact that PJ or Hart or Shrimp or whoever it was giving some insights. But that's me. I'm not uncomfortable when the parents giggle. You know, in my retirement, okay, which is, you know, finally going to come next week, every one of my patients, I'm giving them a compass. And it's a compass for them to always remember the direction that we worked on with them. But the compass isn't only from me, right? Because I'm part of a team. It's from the dogs. And in this case, I don't have any of the other animals with me anymore working. But what I'm saying is you got to be comfortable with the approach. So there's a wealth of information there, but you got to be able to find some of it. I think this organization, as well as there are other organizations, AAII and IAHIO and ISAS. I can go on with the litany. Also are professional forums. But I think one of the things that's exciting is the recognition of this specific organization, that we recognize that there are people that are interested in AAI as professionals that may be multidisciplinary, to work in the field and to acquire a skill set so that we're really competent in what we do. And I have to say, competency to me is really important. And I say that proudly for our field, that I know that some of this early on could have been trial and error, but even with trial and error, there needed to be that pursuit of excellence and best practice, and again, to assure the well-being of everybody that's involved. So I think I answered the question. Yeah. I think it's searching, but to be you, because I really want you to feel comfortable as you learn to develop your style. Because some of you, I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. That's my real interest, although I'm a humanist. I use a lot of behavior therapy, but some of you might be more analytic. Some of you may be using more didactic approaches. It has to fit your style. So again, that's really important, because when people ask me, and this is probably one last point, am I an animal assisted therapist? And I would say, no, I'm a psychologist that uses cognitive behavior therapy, and probably a rich part of my therapeutic regime is something that's called animal-assisted interventions or animal-assisted therapy. So I think it's really important to know how you do this work so that, again, you become more fluid. Because once you lose that fluidity and naturalness in being a clinician, you sort of strong arm yourself to do the work well. And
Yeah.
to me, doing it well is important. Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's our goal here at AAAP, like you talked about, to help people learn how to do this well and to facilitate these conversations, because we by no means have all of the answers for how, this is going to look in each vocation that our members represent. And so we are very excited about the opportunity to get people together by vocation and to have conversations about moving the needle in the next direction. So that next question that I wanted to ask came from a member of the organization who is working to develop standards of practice for incorporating AAI in social work, similar to how our friend Dr. Leslie Stewart developed the standards for counselors. So we're wondering if you have any key points that you wish she would consider when making recommendations for how to develop these standards of practice in that vocation-specific context.
Number one, all of these are like a dream come true for me. So I don't want to overbear you with my enthusiasm and excitement. I've been writing about this even prior to 2000, when that first handbook on animal-assisted therapy came out, that the field needed to move the needle. So I like your term, Taylor, when you talked about the needle. I have argued for years that we needed an organization such as the one we're here today to celebrate, because we need to professionalize the field and to help people understand that AAI is more than just, if I could use the word, puppy love. It's more than the dog just licking your hand and all of a sudden you're going to get healed. There's a lot more to this. In regards to the standards of professionals, I can't begin to argue that one, I've said it many, many times, one needs to be competent, beyond competent, in regards to the work you do and anything you do. I'll go back a second by alluding to a comment that my grandfather gave me when I was a little boy. He was my favorite human. And he used to call me Aubrey, not Aubrey. So if you ever meet me, you can call me Aubrey and I'll smile. He used to say to me, Aubrey, make a life, not a living, I apologize. Make a life, not a living, and you'll be happy with what you do. And that's the way I've lived my life, all of it. I've never made a living. I've never went to work and considered it a job. I've always just enjoyed my life. One of the challenges in animal-assisted interventions, for sure, are standards. I feel that the field has had many people that have dabbled, and it's okay to dabble. I guess I have no right to be overly critical. But again, if you're going to do this well, you really need to be competent in understanding the animals that we work in, their welfare. We need to know how to integrate therapy work well. So the standards, I think today there are templates, and it's not like you're going to steal ideas from other people, but you could share that some of these ideas are not original, of course, that you have reviewed the standards that are out there written by many organizations. I think we need to look at standards on what we believe as a competent animal-assisted therapy professional. What do we expect that professional to have in his or her being? And that is an awareness of almost all of the areas that the exam, the things that we're talking about, are relevant. One, I think that people really need to be able to understand the literature on human-animal bond and HAI, because you need to understand why this is more relevant. The literature on HAI and HAB is richer and much more prolific than the work that we have on the outcome work on AAI specifically. It's getting better. I think people need to be competent in recognizing what is what are some of the best practice approaches? One, in treatment, what are some of the best practice approaches in regards to preserving animal welfare? So that means you need to know ethology, you need to understand animal behavior, zoonosis, protection for our clients. Again, these are general pieces. And then I think there's a code of ethics. I've written a lot about ethics. How do we preserve the ethical integrity of our clients? How do we preserve the ethical integrity, of course, of our partner, our therapy animal, to be sure that we're doing these things for the right reasons? Does that make sense to you? So I think there's enough literature out there in regards to not only Leslie Stewart's work. I'm blocking the other counseling organization. Dr. Chandler has written on standards. I blocked on her name for a moment. I apologize. There have been many people that have written on this. Ohio now has a listing of standards that they believe professionals need to be competent. And I think to answer the question, I really look at what do we think a good professional should have to do this work well and to respect, one, the integrity of being a professional. So if you're a social worker, what's the code or the standards of excellence that social workers need to follow? So that is not excluded in our conversation, but we don't have to reinvent, that you're competent in knowing the therapeutic approaches that you're using, you're cognizant of the ethical parameters that you're under so that you keep a very good ethical practice. So the additional side to this is really related to being a professional that has the competency in working in the field of animal-assisted interventions effectively, so that you're doing justice to the work that you're doing. So, for example, I like baking and I like cooking, but I'm not a tremendous chef. So if I really want to become a better chef, I'm going to need to learn things. And so I think, again, I'm not pushing you to consider taking the national exam that is being brought up here with the organization. But the reality is it demonstrates competency. One of my proudest certificates in my office has always been my therapy animals, different certificates that they have. And people sort of giggle and go, she has her degrees too. And I go, yeah, because it's hard work to be a therapy animal. And I think I still remember years ago when I would bring the birds to work. I've had parents that said to me, I wish my children responded the way your therapy animals do to you. And they always said to me that, number one, I always save the animal's face. I never embarrass a therapy animal in front of a client, even when they have made a mistake, because it's nature to make errors. It's important to be supportive. So actually, one of the things that I've used for years is the way I interact with my therapy animals. In many ways is the same way I would love my parents to learn to interact with their children, with the same level of respect, maybe, of course, different approaches, but that level of respect and warmth is crucial. So I think I answered your question, because I think the standards, one, for the professional field really are the same. We expect competency as a social worker. We expect competency as an educator. We expect competency as an OT or a PT or a licensed psychologist or a nurse. All of those standards and ethics are the same. The key part are the standards of learning how to work in tandem with various therapy animals and the species that you choose.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for everyone who has interest in this topic, we will be reaching out to membership soon to divide into working groups by vocation to talk about some of these next steps that are needed. So you will all be invited, and we are looking for leadership in that too. So you'll hear more. But it is exciting to hear too what you're saying, Dr. Fine, because of course you were a part of helping us create the content for our certified animal assisted intervention specialist exam. But we had leaders from so many of the other organizations and from so many of the other efforts on what does it look like to be a competent handler in a professional setting. And that's all, covered in that certification exam. So be sure to check that out if you haven't. So we're shifting a little bit to ask some of my favorite questions, and this is going to talk about the therapy animal in general. And so what characteristics do you look for in a therapy animal, and what would you suggest to people who are just getting started and looking for that therapy animal partner?
It's a good question. I've had companion animals in my life that were wonderful companion animals, but they weren't they wouldn't do well in a therapy environment. So I think, the key ingredients I always talk about are things that you've heard many, many times. The affiliative nature, to me, is really crucial. That one, the therapy animal is eager to be involved with other humans. I think consistency, reliability, and temperament are the other areas. Consistency and reliability is, it's important that I know how the animals will respond, probably in most situations. So to me, consistency and reliability really relates to training, but also for me to be able to be a good observer, because not only do I watch my patients when I work, I really watch how the animals are responding, because sometimes they pick up things that I don't even pick up, and I realize that I may have been missing something. But I also don't want to watch them because I want them to have that level of comfort. So my animals have different places in the office that they can walk away from the work, because if they're not really engaged, they can have breaks. It's their choice. But if I think it's important to recognize the issue of temperament, the reliability, the consistency. And then I think over years, because some of us have therapy animals that grow with us, of course, is the recognition of when it's time to reduce the work, when is it time to retire a therapy animal. And I remember my first therapy animal my first therapy dog that I was going to retire, her name was Puppy. And she was a wonderful golden retriever. And she had been working alongside another dog that we had that was actually doing the work alongside her. Well, when I retired Puppy, we had a party for like what you think of doing with some humans. And I remember getting a phone call from my wife. I never forgot that. It was, maybe 2004, 2003. And she said, "You have to come home." I go, "Why do I have to come home?" She said, "Well, Puppy's sitting at the door and she won't leave." So for over 20 years now, I've been writing about retiring therapy animals and how do you do this gracefully, respectfully, and how do you realize that one of the challenges about being a therapy animal is that these animals are so engaged with humans. When you change it really quickly, it can become complicated for an animal because now you broke that routine. So how do you retire therapy animals is equally as important. So again, that would be the other variable that I would look at. So affiliative behavior, consistency, reliableness, and temperament. And then what I'm also looking at is the cognizant awareness of where my animal is now. So that when I start with a therapy animal that's really affiliative early in his or her career, that may change over time. So you have to be watching your therapy animal, because I know many people that bring animals to work that really don't want to be there. And that shouldn't happen. I'm going to give you two bad examples, if that's okay. I had a therapist once ask me, "Well, what do I do with my therapy dog?" And don't take this personally, that when all the men come into my office, my dog immediately growls at all of them and is not comfortable. What should I do? And my first response is, well, you got to think about this. Maybe you don't have your therapy animal work with you, especially when you have males, because it's uncomfortable. But I remember one person, and I won't say what country this was in, but years ago I had a therapy dog handler that had a couple of animals, specifically dogs, that he brought to work. And one of the dogs, when he was going in the morning, when they walked to the car, began to throw up and kept on doing this. So he said, "Well, what do I do?" And I didn't want to be rude, because I've always that again is an important part of my lifestyle that I want to be supporting, not the other side. And I said, have you ever considered that maybe he just doesn't want to do this work anymore, and that you need to stop? And he said, well, this is my livelihood, but it's beyond livelihood, isn't it? The dog really had changed and did not like this work. And at some point in time, this isn't about you. I learned that a long time ago. It's not about me. It's about, one, the clients that I serve, but equally as important, it's about the animals I work alongside with. And since they don't have a real a human voice to tell me, I need to be their advocate, and I need to know what's the best approach to making sure. So my animals get picked up during the day to go home. They of course they get walked all the time, but they have breaks. In fact, when Puppy came back to work, the example that I gave you, I set up one room that was like sort of her little room. And as she went to sleep, the lights, because she just wanted to be there, the lights were turned off, the door was open, but she could sleep. I always used to giggle because she might take a nap for a couple hours, no one bothered her. And then when she woke up, she'd walk right in and tell Hart, hey, Hart, move out of my way. I got to show you how to do the work. So I'm maybe being a little tongue in cheek with that, but I think those are the critical variables. I think knowing what you're looking at in regards to stressors and of all the issues that we talk about more today than when I began my career are very logical. You know what I mean? You need to do your homework. And again, I have to say this, if your dog starts experiencing some of the stressors that we talk about that are really tremendously salient, that's really late in the game to figure out what's going on. I did develop an instrument that, if you're interested, that we sort of measured with some biological measures, specifically cortisol and variable heart rate, that looks at a questionnaire that you can fill out to see if your therapy animal is feeling good about that environment. So getting a check on where the animal is on a daily basis is pretty simple to know if he or she wants to do the work. So if you're interested in that instrument, just ask Taylor, and you can email me. I'll put in the chat my email, and you can send me an email.
Perfect. We'll also get it from you and send it to our membership in general, because I think that would be a really helpful resource. And everyone remember too, I know it can be challenging. It's kind of the joke around the office. I have 9 dogs. I use my work as an excuse to have that many, but not everybody can have that many. And so if you're a professional who's looking to partner with volunteer teams, we can help you with that. So reach out to me if that's something that we can be of assistance with. So I know some questions might have come up for some of you, and if so, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will take a look and see what we have time for, and the ones we don't, I will make sure we have for our next meeting, which we're going to talk more about, day-to-day practice in the office. What does that look like with therapy animals? But my last question for you, Aubrey, is what is the most important piece of advice that you would give to someone who's new to the field?
Oh, I didn't see that question. It's a good one. Love what you do. Maybe take my grandfather's advice, make a life, not a living, and it'll be the best thing ever. And I have to say, as I come closer to ending my clinical practice, although I have to say that I'm going to do 1 day a week in another office, so it's not totally, my wife giggles at that. I look at the work that I've done over the years, and I know many of you feel this way too. It's really been a romance. I love all the things that I do. I even talk about, like, the example, I've been married, it'll be 44 years next week. And I love my wife as much as I did when I first met her, but it's different, of course, when you're 44, 44 years married, or, I've known her almost 50 years. Our lives are different. My response is, I love doing this work. I don't consider it work. It's been a privilege to help support families. It's been a real honor to work with so many therapy animals over the decades, and each of them are special. And I think that passion is what you need. You again, working with humans just as a regular mental health provider, or a physical therapist, occupational therapist, or any allied health person, you need to love what you do. You need to be comfortable. You can't see this as, oh God, I got to go to work today and I'm just going to fake it. Years ago, I was at a lecture for speakers, and they once said, and I won't say the person's name, a very famous actor was doing a Broadway show, and they said, geez, he just called in his performance. And when you think about it, if you go to a concert or a theater and someone's calling in their performance and they're just really not into it, you walk away saying, I feel cheated. Well, the people that are the recipients of our services should never feel cheated. We do the best we can. That doesn't mean it always works, right? Sometimes things are hard, but we need to be passionately committed to the stuff that we do. And of course, to me, the whole merry-go-round ride to work alongside wonderful four-legged creatures, or wingers, as I call the birds, or sliders, which are the lizards, has been a true blessing in enriching my professional competency, because I have to say that in many ways, incorporating animal-assisted interventions has also become a gateway for me, which is a gateway for many of you, to get further into the needs that your clients display. So I think I answered it by saying passion, and to not really see work as work. I know as I say that, I've already argued that work to me still is being very competent, demonstrating excellence and efficacy. All of those words I still use. However, the passion is the most important ingredient. And I think that the youngsters and the mums and the dads that I've worked with over the years, the greatest compliment that they could give me is that I care. I know that doesn't sound as a tremendously professional term, but to me it is. I care about every human I relate to, and I try to do the best I can. And the best I can means that sometimes I don't get all the answers, but it means that I'm giving it the effort. And for sure, I'm never afraid to say I need to look further. I need to find better answers. And that's why looking at resources, talking to colleagues, going to the literature, and then of course thinking outside the box are some of the other directions. So I hope I answered your question, and I know we're almost running out of time, but it's really been an honor to be with you guys this morning.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm more excited than ever. I feel very excited after this conversation. It's so important to love your job. I certainly do. It is such an honor and privilege of mine to be in this position and this intervention that I care so much about, and to be a part of this group of professionals who clearly has this passion. I know we have the right people here to move this field forward and to protect the animals, protect the people, and just I can imagine what we will achieve in the future when more and more people have access to therapy animals with the very qualified professionals who they partner with. So thank you so much, Dr. Fine, for your time today. We're excited for our next conversation with you on September 16th. We're going to talk more about applied practice. So again, questions that come up for you, please send them to me, and I will make sure you all have that Zoom meeting link as well. And we'll be looking forward to that time together. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Fine. Oh, you have, yes?
I just wanted to say, to reiterate what you mentioned, and then you can finish off your comment, which is you are the new leadership. And it's people like you that are going to move, as Taylor used the word, the needle for people to better understand the field. So it's just a true privilege for me to be able to be a little part of that direction for you, and any support that I can provide, I'm really happy to do so. So consider yourselves a very important new generation of professionals, especially with all the changes in bringing the direction in a better way. So again, I'll pass it back to Taylor, but I look forward to doing this again in September. Thank you.
That was perfect. Many notes of things coming in the chat, Dr. Fine. So this has been great for all of us. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk again soon.
Bye-bye.